Hello, this is Will. Thanks very much for downloading this podcast. It's a bit of a departure. The first 4 episodes of this podcast all look backwards. They are interviews with retired or semi-retired teachers from the prep school days of yore. And I was trying to establish in those podcasts what has changed in independent education, particularly in prep independent education, by interviewing people who had taught in the recent past and asking them to comment on what had changed. This is rather different. This is an interview with the founder and still headmaster of a new school. It's only 10 years old, and it's called Heritage School in Cambridge. I've been a fan of Heritage for a couple of years now, and I'm so excited to be able to share some of what they're doing with my small band of listeners. It follows a method called the Charlotte Mason method, which is popular in America, particularly in homeschool networks over there. But although it originated in this country, it is still pretty unknown, or it used to be better known, but now it is only done in really a very small handful of schools in this country. Jason goes through the story of how he discovered Charlotte Mason education, which is intimately related to his family, and then lays out beautifully how his school embodies it in what they do. If I could summarize it in one sentence, Charlotte Mason is an attempt to tackle apathy. And they think that apathy or anomie in contemporary childhood is the biggest enemy. And he walks through how they try and promote sort of joy and wonder whilst also or through providing an outstanding education. So he talks quite a lot about their nature education, their attitude and approach to technology. There's a great position within Charlotte Mason education on the idea of living education, living books, living ideas, against what Charlotte Mason called Twaddle, which is great. He also goes through this method of narration, which is a really unique approach, which used to be used in lots of schools, but is much less used now. It's a great little trick for teachers today. And in total, it makes up a great defense of what education should be about against many of the trends, many of the negative trends that have come out in this podcast series, which define some aspects of contemporary education. I really hope you enjoy it. There's lots of links both on the YouTube link and on SoundCloud. Let me know any questions and do be in touch. I should say, again, a big thanks to Dougal. He's actually, from this episode to the previous episode, he seems to have changed the name of his band from Paint to Juno Dream. But do look them up and give them your support. Thanks. Bye. Thanks, Jason. Well, I really appreciate you giving up the time for this. I was downstairs earlier and I saw the progression of photographs from a very small group of 20 or 30 did it begin with?
Yes.
Over the past 10 years, the school has grown to numbers around 200 now, is that right?
That's right, that's exactly right.
Would it be okay just to start with the story of the school's founding?
Of course. So in fact, we started in our first year, September 5th, 2007, with 16 pupils. And today, I think 10 years and a couple of months later, we've got 199 on roll with a full capacity of 206, I think. So we're encouraged that we're near full capacity. The story of why we started this school goes back to my wife's education experience. So she's British, was brought up in Hampshire. And her parents discovered a small school, a PNEU school in Compton, which I think is on the Hampshire-Sussex border. And my wife Fiona, my wife's sisters went there, and then Fiona went there for 3 or 4 years, sort of aged 7 to 11, 8 to 12. And that was very formative for her sisters who'd gone ahead of her, and for the family. And it led her mother, Susan Schaefer Macaulay, to write a book called For the Children's Sake, which was re-articulating the whole philosophical educational outlook of Charlotte Mason, the founder of the PNEU. So that book was published in 1984, and was influential in North America especially. But anyway, it was clearly influential within the family culture, and that experience was very influential for Fiona. And so as we started thinking as parents about what we wanted for our own children, then it was the natural place to turn to. There was, in a sense, some intellectual capital there in the family history that we started to explore more carefully.
Just to get the thread of the history right with Charlotte Mason, I've tried putting Charlotte Mason's name to any teacher educationalist I've met in the last couple of years, and it tends to raise a complete blank. As far as I know from the history, she was operating she was writing and lecturing at the end of the 19th century. She founded the PNEU schools movement.
Yes.
Am I right that her influence had really begun to wane into the middle of the 20th century, and that there were just a few of these schools still remaining, that your wife was very fortunate enough to go to one of the very few last schools? That's
right. That is my understanding, and so she was born 1843, I think.
Okay.
1842, died 1923. And so yes, somehow, perhaps through the cataclysms of those two world wars and so on, the movement started to wither. And I don't know a lot about its history, so I mustn't say too much or get it wrong. But I think some have felt that some of the insights of the PNEU were beginning to be incorporated into mainstream education post-Second World War, which is, of course, debatable, which we would challenge now. But yes, it was certainly thriving, I think, as a movement from the 1890s into the 1930s, early 40s, certainly.
She had some influential backers. I seem to remember that she had the founder of, was it Girton College, Cambridge?
That's right, is it Anne Clough?
Yes, and the founder of Cheltenham Ladies College. And so that sort of, that big explosion of interest both in liberal education for the broad part of British society, but
certainly
also for women as well.
That's right.
Seemed to go hand in hand, and that she was, if not in the mainstream of that, maybe even leading some parts of that. So that was the sort of movement that she was
certainly
part
a
of.
liberal education for all is one of her mottos.
Yeah.
And by which she meant generous.
Yes. Yeah.
Ambitious, intellectually serious. Mind food, as she might say, believing that every child had the capacity to engage with great literature, great art, nature, and so on. So yes, she was very much driving that agenda.
Yeah. Well, I want to get into all of those details in due course. When you set up Heritage, was it a critique in any way of what you saw in the current educational landscape?
Yes, it was. In a sense, we were first, though, drawn, I suppose it's true to say, to what is so positive and enriching in her own vision.
Yeah.
So if you start to read some of her works, her home education, school education, towards a philosophy of education, I think you start to get a sense of a passion and a compelling vision of what education can be. And as I read some of those books, as Fiona did, as we read my mother-in-law's book again, or for the first time for me, the intuitive response was, yes, this captures what education should be about. So I would want to stress the positives, but also, of course, we had both been in mainstream secondary education, comprehensives here in the Cambridge area for a few years, and had seen things which concerned us. Foremost among those would be apathy.
Yeah.
That too many young people were coming out the other end of mainstream education, relatively switched off to learning, seeing it as a hoop to jump through, as a means to an end rather than an end in itself, as some intrinsic part of the good life. And given all that is so fascinating and engaging about the reality in which we find ourselves, that seems to be a fundamental tragedy. And why would children come out somewhat apathetic, switched off, jumping through hoops, rather than seeing history or literature or science, maths, as somehow intrinsic to a good life, to what they're passionate about, whereas it often feels that children do these things because they must, but their real interests lie somewhere else. Anyway, so I guess our aspiration was to try and create a school culture that would treasure knowledge and learning for its own sake, and try and resist some of the distortions, some of the threats to that, and see if we couldn't create a culture in which young people could be nurtured, who could emerge balanced, settled in themselves and who they are, and engaged with the world and with knowledge in a straightforward, unaffected way, but a positive outlook on learning and knowledge, lifelong learning, and so on. So that essentially is, the opposite of apathy.
Yes.
In a sense, has been the target.
Yes. Were there any other, you thought, culprits that caused the apathy beyond the hoop jumping through exams?
Yeah, so the exam pressure for results and school statistics and so on, I think, is certainly a culprit. And I think, just to dwell on that for a moment, I think perhaps we can all understand why school leaders or even governments might have a concern about that.
Yes.
But I think the problem comes when it starts to filter right down into the classroom, and that the teachers begin to use this as a lever to put pressure on children to perform.
Yeah.
And when it starts to distort what would be a balanced and humane and enriching curriculum for that end. Rather, I suppose one would want to see school leaders bear the burden of that responsibility, to see standards improving and so on, without letting it compromise the experience of children.
Yes. I always think that the most deathly phrase you can hear in the classroom is this on the syllabus?
Exactly,
is this going to be examined?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so I've often said to our teachers, I just don't really want to hear you say, you need to know this for the test.
Yeah.
Rather, I'd rather they're appealing to some intrinsic reason.
Yeah.
Why do you need to know this? Well, this is exciting, this is interesting, this is biology, and it's fascinating to learn about, and so on. So yeah, that was one of our main concerns. Additionally, I think we were concerned by just large class sizes, and I suppose have felt that we wanted to create a natural, intimate, human environment and experience gathered around enjoyment of learning. And so I think small class sizes and the relatively small size of the school as a whole has been a key part of what we've considered to be important to recovering a culture that is more likely to produce the engaged than the apathetic child.
Maybe you could talk a little bit about Charlotte Mason's concept of living ideas versus what I think she referred to as Twaddle. Because when you're talking about that rich curriculum, she seemed to have a very powerful sense about what would light children's fires and what would turn them off.
Yes, that's right.
Do you allow your teachers to choose, or do you feel that there's a...
No, we do structure the curriculum. We do have literature that we read, and we have maths programs and science programs and so on that we work through. But she particularly talks about living books.
Yes. Yeah.
And the importance of a book-based curriculum. It's important to emphasize as well with Charlotte Mason that she saw herself as addressing some of the weaknesses in the educational system that she was in.
Of course.
And she wasn't necessarily seeking to say everything about everything.
Yes.
She acknowledged that, let's say with language teaching or maths teaching, that what people were doing was generally pretty effective, and therefore she didn't devote much time to it. But living books as opposed to Twaddle or books that she saw dry as dust was certainly something she was passionate about. And I think in trying to capture what she means by a living book, it's a little bit intangible, but she'll use words like it's vital.
Yeah.
Or she'll say things like it goes from the outer court of the child's mind, or it doesn't remain solely in the outer court of the child's mind, but it sort of penetrates into the deeper person, or it gets at them in some way.
So it really speaks to that apathy point.
Yes, exactly. And I mean, she has a tremendous confidence, which we share and we think is true, in the ability of knowledge fitly given to be genuinely attractive to children. And I think it's a great shame if our system tends to think about learning as a fundamentally bitter pill that we must sugarcoat to cram it in. Rather, knowledge is its own reward. And with that confidence, we try, following Charlotte Mason's lead, just to serve up a rich diet of interesting things. But anyway, to get back to the living books thing, she also has this great confidence in literature, in knowledge presented in literary form.
Yes.
Has a unique power. And so we have emphasized, for example, as she did, the importance of narrative history. Especially here I'm thinking of the junior years, and then in the senior school we start to move slightly more in the direction of typical senior school history, where they're obviously analysing different sources and becoming more critically aware as budding historians. But our view is that at first they need to get a sense of the flow of the story. But so what we do, just to illustrate, is we have a 4-volume history of the world that we read in years 3, 4, 5, and 6 through our junior school. And the children will be read a portion of a chapter on the Civil War, for example, Charles I. And then they'll be expected to narrate or tell back what they just heard from the reading. And in that way, they're restating what they heard. The mind is being active on the material that they've just heard. And that helps to internalize and consolidate that knowledge. Sometimes they write it out as well, as their writing skills are up to that. But for younger children, it's brilliant because you can get an insight into what they're taking away. It's oral, which is marvelous. But I guess the point, going back to the books, is that knowledge presented in literary form is gripping. And there's a story there, there's a storyline, a plot line, and so it's easier to remember because you can see how the plot unfolded, and you can remember that. It's not just bare facts. So she might have thought then about the other kinds of textbooks that had been produced by educationalists and so on, as dry as dust, as Twaddle, compared to a living book, a living history written by someone with a passion and an interest in history.
She didn't like educationalists writing down to children and sort of manipulating very rich content in a more simplistic way that then took all the juice out of it.
Exactly. And one of the beauties of that is that she is open to the risk that young people may not get everything. And so often we have our agenda as teachers and think we must get this in. They must know this, they must know that. Whereas she would take a more risk-based approach, you might say, presenting a rich curriculum and letting them take from something like a reading about the Civil War, or part of it, some of the facts and stories out of that they found really enriching.
She's got some great metaphors, like laying the feast before children and allowing them to
that's right.
to feed off it, and also a great image of seeing the educational project as opening a door for a child onto the wide world.
That's right.
And there's a series of door openings.
Yes, that's right, exactly.
But what you were saying about narrative history, that rubs up against two great sort of shibboleths of modern educational orthodoxy. First is that children don't need to know knowledge because they can just Google it.
Yes.
Which you really hear in not just this country in both the state and the independent sector, but really
Yes.
it's now a given on
Yeah.
pretty much across
Yes.
many parts of educational discourse.
Yes.
The second is the point about narration and
Yes.
how that would be crudely characterized by its opponents would be that we're just teaching children to regurgitate information.
Yes.
And why is that important? Again, because they can just always Google that information, and
Yes.
isn't it much better to teach them those historical, the skills of a historian
Yes.
right from the get-go, so
Yes.
that by the time they grow up, they are adept
Mm.
with their skills.
Yes. Yes.
So can you
Yeah,
maybe talk a little
yeah.
bit more about
Yeah, well, you-
maybe knowledge and memory, and also
Tease that out a bit.
how
Yeah.
different the narration approach is? Because as far as I'm aware, no other school in this country
Mm.
endorses narration as you do, and I think it's a very valuable educational tool that hasn't.
Yes.
It was used quite a lot in this country, but it's
Yes.
now
Yes.
gone.
Certainly agree that it's valuable. And so let's see if we can tease
Yeah.
some of these things out, because they're important themes. I think we would probably all agree that the essential thing is that a child's mind must be set to work on some content.
Yep.
And that if that does not happen, there is no real learning taking place. So spoon feeding clearly is inadequate, and we want to create a context in which children's minds are actively engaged. And so the emphasis upon great literature and so on is partly to draw them in, to engage them, and to inspire them. Partly to address this deeper question of the motive for learning, their enjoyment of learning, their attitude to learning, is a key issue that we need to be sensitive to. And yes, I suppose children can look things up, but the other question, I suppose, would be, well, where do they get the initial framework of knowledge that starts to give them a sense of the contours of, let's say, history or of any other discipline? Where does that framework come from, which they then can later on begin to analyze critically?
Yep.
So with respect to this question of budding historians, our view is definitely that they need to have a story, a plausible story, that's responsibly told, in place, that they can then start to deconstruct later. So that together with just the sheer enjoyment at that age and stage of reading good history, and the benefits of that for their attitude and enjoyment and so on, to me are strong reasons in favour of that. If you come back to me with questions, I'm not sure I'm going to catch all the threads of your comments, but a comment on narration and why it's so important, because I think this starts to tease out something that's very important for us as a school and our ethos and culture and values. One reason why narration is so important is that it encourages active listening. Active listening is essential because we want young people who are able to be attentive, to be able to concentrate. Charlotte Mason will say things like, a child's ability to be attentive, or an ability to attend, or the ability to attend, is the hallmark of an educated person. So I think there's a crisis, you might say, in wider society on this point. And I think a theme we could explore is the impact of digital media upon attention span. But one of the things we're very passionate about is narration for this reason, because it encourages attentive listening. Now, Charlotte Mason was comparatively ruthless in the way she talked about this, because she'll say that you must insist, teachers, upon a single reading. Do not review it. A single reading of a story about, let's say, Charles I, followed by narration, either oral or written. That's the end of the lesson. you move on to the next thing, and the next time you might pick up a later portion of the story of the Civil War, or moving on to the next part of history. And that, she says, should be sufficient. So another great benefit of narration is its relative efficiency, that it allows you to keep moving across a lot of material relatively quickly, which is very, that is related to the concept of enjoyment in learning as well, because it's stimulating.
You don't get bogged down on a 3-week project doing...
Exactly, you're not flogging a dead horse, as it were, but you're keeping going. So narration, I think, is really valuable for those reasons, and if I had to choose one, well, both of them, I say that if the relative efficiency of it and the fact that it's proactively cultivating the habit of attention in a culture which is losing that capacity.
Yes. Does it help the teachers with their assessment as well, of the pupils throughout the term? Are they making little notes at someone's oral or written narration?
Yes, they often are. And also we do exams, this is for our younger pupils from years 2 to 4, 5, when their writing skills that are not necessarily equal to expressing in a relatively short space of time everything they know. They do oral exams.
Right.
So we've just been doing that this past week, and it's a wonder to see how much they can retain, having done this, of a story that they read and narrated upon 6 weeks, 8 weeks earlier.
Sort of viva.
Yeah.
Are they asked questions on it, or it's really just a sort of...
It's quite an open question, the way we do that. We might give them 3 or 4 points to which they could respond. Tell and we, at this age, we would keep it very open. Tell everything you know about William the Conqueror. Right. Or, tell everything you know about Charles I. And yesterday I was sitting in with some year 5s, and they were writing out their answers as they finished, and I was just minding them while the teacher took some off to do some art. And a couple of them kept writing. One of them was on to sort of 2.5 pages of A4. And they'll have done no revision for that.
Right.
It is simply based upon reading a well-told story, narrating upon that story, and that's it.
I noticed that one of the indices Charlotte Mason used to use for the quality of her schools was how many proper nouns were used
that's right.
in a given bit of work. She didn't take it too seriously, but she thought that was quite a nice little indicator of just how much knowledge had been soaked up.
That's right. And reading some of those lists of things she mentions, and you'd be quite stunned.
Humbling. At 10-year-olds.
At what they're capable of. And that's one of the beauties of her whole approach, is a high view of the child's mind. We're not talking down to children, we're giving them proper mind food. And proper mind food fitly given, and they lap it up. And that's the secret, in our view, to enjoyment in education, is that kind of stimulation. It's not about the all-singing, dancing teacher, it's not about the whiteboard, and so on. It's a relatively visually low stimulus environment here, because we want them to be attentive to the words and to cherish those words and to to dwell on those words.
I think this is why Charlotte Mason's so unique, because most of the people, particularly in this country, who are very pro-knowledge in this sort of dichotomy we have between knowledge and skills, are also tend to be on the more authoritarian end of the spectrum in terms of one teacher at the front of the class speaking to a class and being not necessarily a showman or showwoman, but at least a strong leader. And Charlotte Mason's actually quite liberal on that front. You can almost hear her saying phrases like guide on the side or facilitator, which get a lot of traditionalists back up because they think that is a diminution of authority. But in her eyes, as far as I understand it, the authority is teacher and pupil to the living idea or the living book or the text.
That's right. And she'll often say things like, essentially the teacher needs to learn the art of standing aside. She'll use a phrase like that. Or the art of masterly, this is also pertains to parents, the art of masterly inactivity. It's masterly because it's there and you're aware of what's going on, but it's inactive because the parent or the teacher, the educator knows that if the child is ready to grow, he or she must do the engagement for himself or herself.
It's not shirking responsibility and saying,
No.
You can read whatever you want.
That's right.
I don't mind. I don't know anything more than you do.
That's
but
right.
it's just
Yes.
it's also not under-equipping the child by doing it all for them.
Exactly,
Mm.
and that's exactly the point, because if they don't learn to do the work, to get the knowledge for themselves, to chew on it for themselves, then they're on crutches, and they don't know how to walk for themselves.
Do you mind if we just shift a little bit to think about both, I suppose, Charlotte Mason's view of the person and therefore Heritage's view?
Yeah.
I suppose some people might think that the reason Charlotte Mason fell out of fashion after the Second World War was as Britain became more secularised.
Yeah.
How important is the Christian view of the person to her work and your work?
Yeah, good question. Well, if we just talk a little bit first around her view of the person, and is it because she also was someone who worked across faith boundaries. So there were many of her key lieutenants, as it were. One, Franklin, her first name, but she, Henrietta Franklin, I think it is, was Jewish. So there's certainly room for common ground here across these divides. But she had a great, shall we say, a deep view of the person. She talks in terms of the mystery of the person, or of the indefinite person, or of not, and therefore of us as teachers, parents, not thinking that we can too readily define the person or circumscribe the person. But she'll say that we must be open, these wonders of nature break out of the child. And we want to have this sense of wonder about what this child is and has the potential to become. I think she was responding, I've been doing a little bit of reading lately, but I need to do more, but going back to Locke, for example, and the idea of the person as the blank slate, that therefore could be, in a sense, created or defined by the inputs.
Yep.
And she is resisting that tendency and saying, no, there is something wonderful, even sacred, about this other being that is there in front of you, teacher, and you dare not underestimate what he or she is.
Just on that point, it's such a, again, crucial one in educational philosophy, because the more progressive educators would take that insight and say, well, therefore an education's job is not to put information or discipline, put knowledge or authority on a child, and instead it's sort of all within a child, just needs to be brought out.
Yes,
sort of education as leading out.
Yes, right.
It's used as an excuse to not teach.
Yes, right. Yes. So she would certainly reject that.
Yeah.
What she would say is that the child is, she's relatively blunt, weak.
Yes.
That is physically.
And ignorant.
And ignorant.
Yeah.
Yes. And exactly. And so, but she also recognizes that the child has all of the faculties, and this is an element of current thought in her day that she was critiquing, this emphasis upon faculties or skill building, which is the modern equivalent, knowledge versus skills emphasis. She critiqued that, saying that the child as a person has all of these qualities already there, of rational analysis, of imagination, and so on. And that what they need is not a bunch of dry exercises to develop these faculties, but they just need a lot of mind food and knowledge. Get to work with it.
Yeah.
And those things will grow of their own accord. And she'll also talk about, with wonder at what a child aged, from birth up to age 2, 3, 4, 5, what they assimilate and learn to accomplish in such a short space of time. Acquisition of language and so on, and all of the things that they learn so rapidly. So she'll speak with great wonder at what a child is in that sense as well. But so there's no undervaluing of the person in any sense intrinsically, but as you say, there's clearly a role for parents and teachers, and follow your thread in a moment, but let me take a slight detour
Yeah.
to help establish relations.
Yeah.
And this is really the central idea for the educator, in her view, is the science of relations. And I think it's quite profound, and it's saying essentially that as persons we grow, as we form a connection with, a relationship with those things which are outside of us.
Yeah.
Nature. Three main categories she would use: God, nature, and humanity, by which she captures all of human culture. And as we form relations with all of these things outside of us, we grow. So the role of the teacher and the parent is to help make those relations good, to provide the context in which it can happen, to help initiate those connections. And then the person, being what a person is, they're drawn to those things, and off they go. But so, remind me of our question. We were talking about the view of the person and
Yes.
the Christian ethos as
Yes.
well. Yeah.
And just to go back to what you were saying about Locke and the tabula rasa,
Yeah.
I think she was also criticising a bit of that late 19th century movement of using the metaphor of gardens and the Freud's kindergarten, that children were all nature, and just if you got the conditions right, they would grow in particular ways.
That's
so
right.
the human person, she thought, had to be, as you said, sort of sacralised and properly distinguished.
Yes, against
I
the
suppose,
reductionism.
yes, absolutely.
Yes.
And I suppose that the modern form of that would be the very prevalent notion of the human as a machine.
Exactly right. Against which we want to recover a sense of wonder and mystery. I've been doing some work recently, rather behind the curve, no doubt, on the growth mindset concepts.
Yes.
But in this way, she has a tremendous optimism about what a child is and can become, and with ongoing, and this vision of life as ongoing learning, of engagement, of growth, and so on. So she was very open, optimistic, positive, but rooted in quite a deep view of the person, and that this does link to the Christian faith. She was a devout Anglican, and therefore saw that the person is the image bearer of God and has this divine-like quality and capabilities. And so for her, and I'd say equally true for us, that provided a philosophical anchor which helps us to not be blown off course by other pressures to reduce what education is all about. And so we resist that pressure because we have this anchored conviction that the child is this mysterious being, this substantial other who must be served, not manipulated.
And how hard is it to run a school that resists those challenges of secularised Britain, secularised Cambridge? Is it? Do you feel like you're behind the barricades, or
not really? I think, I guess in terms of resisting the reductionism, I think it's a lot of things we've already talked about.
Yes. Yeah.
In terms of the statistics exam-driven orientation, or the reduction of the curriculum, instead of keeping it broad, reducing it. These are the kinds of things which really disenfranchise children.
Yes, and on that point, I expect you get massive agreement from secular parents who worry at reductionism out of their own secular humanism.
Exactly right. And so we don't make faith in any sense an admissions criteria. But because of our gently positive Christian ethos, which is a little bit like a CAV primary school, we do attract more Christian families than an ordinary school might. I've never even bothered to work what those percentages are, but it's going to be 50-50, 40-60, whatever it is, of those who might actively profess Christian faith. But I think we're appealing on this basis, which is what we should do if it's true. We're appealing on this basis to all people, because if we're putting forward a humane vision of education, it ought to be appealing. And so we don't generally find it a problem.
Mm.
And our Christian themes are explicit in our assemblies, of course, but always in a way which respects the child's need to think for himself, about which Charlotte Mason was very passionate and clear. Which links back to this concept of child as person. They must form their own view of things.
Yep.
We cannot force that.
Yep.
So that we don't feel pretty pressured on this point at all. But also, I'll just add finally that in terms of explicit expressions, the Bible does feature as well in our curriculum, the scriptures, in a very simple way. But we think that is a book that educated young people should be familiar with, in its main narratives and so on.
Yeah, absolutely. Excellent. I must say I've been walking around the school a little bit today, and some months ago when I first came to the school, it feels wonderfully calm. Is that a deliberate goal for you running the school? I'd love maybe your thoughts on discipline and habit, which I know are a big part of Charlotte Mason's thought.
Yeah, very good, yeah. She is very strong on, she emphasises habit. And so I'm going to detour to make sure you pull me back to this idea of the calm school. But she was very ahead of her time because she understood, based upon the knowledge of the time, that, as she would put it, the immaterial mind or soul can, through the decisions taken, make a material impact upon the tissue of the brain.
Yeah.
And so this physiological basis for habit is something she was very clear on, and which has been, in a sense, rediscovered in the last 15, 20 years, neuroplasticity and so on. And so that, in that way, she's quite remarkable. So she saw habit formation as a way of serving the child. And I think she rightly understood that the effort of decision is the most taxing of all things that we have to do in life. Where to go to sixth form, where to go to university, when to move house, what kind of job to do, and so on. So she says you can make life much more simple for a child, much more straightforward, if you help them to form habits rather than having to make decisions about the details of life. Yeah. That you always present yourself like this, and how you wear your uniform, or you look after your things and keep them tidy. But she'll also then, habits will go further into this habit of attention, which is the foremost habit for an educator. And other habits will feature in her writing to do with interpersonal dynamics of politeness or of kindness. But then you're starting to dip into deeper qualities of character there, which don't easily succumb to habit training. Yes. But so it's all very important. So she calls this the way of the will. So she recognized that children need inspiration, but they also need this will training, this support, in order that they can become most fully who they are, the directed life, not the undirected life. So anyway, those are some of the concepts which sit behind the emphasis upon habit formation, which we do push, certainly, here at the school, but relatively gently.
Right.
But it's something we talk about with teachers, and it also is a way of saying to teachers, this really matters.
I don't notice sort of 6 habits written up on every wall you go by, so it's not done in a very doctrinaire way, it seems.
No, that's right. But it's important, and we talk about it with teachers, and as long as they are emphasizing these qualities and these skills and just embracing this reality of human development and of brain function, then it should strengthen their hand and encourage them to continue even when it seems difficult. Yes. Children seem to not quite get it. But in terms of the general feel of the school, I mean, it is very... people do often comment that it seems calm, and part of that is an intentional aesthetic. We're in Victorian buildings here in Cambridge, and so we've tried to keep the walls, the colours, the pictures and other things quite decluttered and calm. That's part of this goal of creating an environment where children can more readily be attentive and to concentrate in a relatively calm space upon the words and the content, the knowledge that they're engaging with.
Tell me more about that, Jason, because I've never heard someone speak so eloquently about that. When you've been around other schools, you think even the way they design their posters is quite attention grabby, quite busy. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. So when we came into these buildings 10 years ago, we had a few days before we started to decorate. We just started in number 19 at the end of the terrace here. We had 3 or 4 rooms. But the nursery that had been using the facility previously had all the stairs treads painted in different colours, yellow, red, green, and so on, right up. And so we just, all of that back to nice gloss white. And the yellow walls. But then also what we put on the walls, we will talk to teachers about not putting up too many posters and so on. Don't keep it too busy. Pretty soon, of course, children don't absorb it at all anyway. But also I think that busyness, to counter that busyness with a decluttered environment, we think makes the engagement with the curriculum just that little bit easier.
Also a great time saver for teachers who are so stressed out, and when they then have to, at the end of each term, change all their wall displays.
Yes, that's right.
I think some of the academies that have actually moved back from that, saying that the mark of a good teacher is to have frequently updated wall displays, have been very brave and absolutely right to do that. Yes,
and we do displays. Of course, children like to see their work, but once a term or something, you might change it over, and that's nice. But yes, they're intentionally decluttered, and also a bigger aspiration for us, in responding to what you've just said, is that from my point of view, I want to keep this school culture as bureaucratic light for teachers as possible, so that they have the maximum headspace that they can to get on with the business of teaching and learning and so on. So to focus on what really matters.
So which activities have you slashed from other teachers who have come here from other schools? Have they mentioned particular things that you've done which they are grateful for?
I take a relatively open view on lesson planning and the system that teachers use for their planning. I want to see, like anyone would, that there is evidence of planning, but the precise way in which they do that is not something that we're overly tight about at all. So that gives them freedom to work in a way that suits them, which I think they appreciate. Also, one of the we obviously think about our reporting cycles and so on, and we've tried to do that in as bureaucratic light a way as possible. But having said that, on the other side, we have our primary obligation is to parents,
of course, and
we want to communicate with them about what we're seeing, obviously. So we have quite a few reporting events throughout the course of the year. But I think another thing that teachers have found helpful is that some of the methodologies, like narration in particular, is very efficient from a planning point of view. It literally can, so it's somewhat repetitive, but that's also part of its power. But if you know that the history lesson is coming, and you just pick up the book and read the next part of it, and then you might decide how to react to that through an oral narration, a written narration, sometimes a picture, whatever, that they put into their book of centuries, by the way, which I haven't mentioned.
Yes.
It's a relative simplicity. And so I think teachers have found that their planning burden is lessened because of some of the methodologies that we use.
We talked about reductionism earlier. I think in few areas has that been more marked than in reporting.
Yes.
And actually one of the aspects of independent schools which is still just about holding on is in the freedom they give the teachers to write a genuine account of a child in their subject.
Yes.
But still you see even very good and established independent schools then clutter the reports with lots of abstracted data and tables and some of the most meaningless stuff, like his attitude for learning is now 3.1 as opposed to and the parents feel none the wiser about what this means.
Yes, of course.
Or he's meeting expectations versus just above expectations. It's all very
education speak.
Yes, exactly.
We certainly try and cut through that. Although we do have indicators, we do report out to parents on attitude, what we call self-management, and also in the junior school on relationships. and how they're getting on with their peers, as well as some academic indicators, maths, English, and so on. So we are emphasizing the other whole person indicators do matter.
Yeah.
We're wanting to stress that. But yes, I hope that it's a fairly straightforward conversation in a sense that happens through that. And one of the things we do along these lines is that twice a year we have our own internal exams. And as in the PNEU days, those would be sent off to recognised experts, often here in places like Cambridge, who would mark the scripts and send them, and then send them back, a bit like a modern exam board might do. But we obviously mark internally, but we send home an exam pack twice a year with all of the scripts to the parents. We take a scan, so we have a record. But in that way I like it, because the parents get to see twice a year, as well as other times, and to see exercise books and so on, but they see actual people work. And so I think that's exciting for parents to be able to see that.
So tell me about the Book of Centuries. Is this incorporating picture study, or this is something separate?
So Charlotte Mason saw history in some ways as the pivot of the curriculum, because it is, so much of what we talk about is historical and literature, or talking about great artists or composers and listening to music and so on. So the Book of Centuries is a concept that the PNEU developed, where pupils would write information about the thing they were looking at. And of course it could come from the history curriculum, or it could come from the artist they're studying, or from the composer they're studying, or maybe reading a biography of a great scientist like Archimedes, for example. And all of these things can go into the Book of Centuries. And the key concept is that it's chronological. Now what the PNEU did is they produced these Book of Centuries, and they would have a couple of pages, a few pages for each century. And gradually you would populate those with little drawings, or we've seen some from old PNEU teachers of beautiful watercolours of a pharaoh's head. But then there's the Nature Notebook, which is another distinctive of the PNEU. But we've adapted that. We've just taken A5 ring binders, and with tabs for the ancient, sort of medieval and modern periods. And that allows us obviously the flexibility of slotting in things in chronological order as they go along. But it's just another way of trying to help young people build up a timeline in their own mind, and to see how events relate to one another, and to begin to get a feel for the texture of a period. If they can learn some of the political or military history, but also some of maybe the literature or the art or the music of that period, it starts to take a sort of texture and shape. Which is very pleasing.
And again, I'm sorry I keep on repeating this, but cross-curricular interdisciplinary learning is something which is so associated with the progressive end of the education spectrum at the moment. And yet, so often when it's done, it actually is done in a way which takes out all the marrow, all the knowledge inherent in those subject disciplines, and does something pretty dry and abstracted, like a project on global warming, where you don't even learn the science of global warming, let alone are you learning the history or the maths involved. So you sort of do worse maths, worse science, worse history, worse geography. And yet somehow that's presented as a very useful project for the children to do, because it's modern, it's contemporary, it's building up all these skills. So
it's interdisciplinary. So
it seems like you've, again, it's what I just love about both Heritage and Charlotte Mason, that it's sort of it's paradoxically combines the best of both ends of so many debates.
Sure, and I think it's something of her genius, and your comments, your freshness on some of the contours of these debates, that helps to highlight that. But on this point, she is explicit in her rejection of thematic learning. So the Book of Centuries is quite a natural way of bringing together things which are historical into one space, and helping to show out the connections and so on. But her view is that doing a whole project on the Egyptians, say, and running your maths through that grid, etc., is a distortion of the natural internal logic of a subject. And ultimately, I think she would say that is devaluing the child. It's it's not giving the child the mind food that he or she naturally deserves. And so she's much keener on having pretty clear subject distinctions and following the internal logic of those in a natural way. And of course, good teachers will point out connections where they naturally exist, but it shouldn't be forced
or artificially done. Tell me about nature study, because as far as I'm aware, this was a curriculum subject done in lots of British schools up until the 1950s or 60s.
Yes.
Is it a part of your curriculum? Do you have a set period per week for nature study?
Yes, we have. In the infants, go on a nature walk every week. The juniors, we do it fortnightly.
Right. So what does a nature walk consist of?
It is obviously that. It's getting out of the building and going about into the fenland just beyond where the school here is, for example. There's nature reserve just beyond that, or there's Hobson's Conduit in front of the school and you can walk up it. And there's some nice patches in that direction. So the essential concept is that children are learning to see ordinary natural phenomena, in inverted commas. And she'll use phrases like eyes and no eyes go for a walk. And no eyes has his head down, and we might these days say he's plugged in.
Yes, yeah.
But whereas eyes is all agog at the wonder of what he or she is seeing. And so that is the goal. It's again engagement versus apathy, essentially. And wonder versus apathy. Exploration versus apathy. And so we go for the walk, and you might go to a particular patch, and sometimes the teacher will have something to offer, or maybe today we might focus upon these particular stand of trees, and you go back to the same places seasonally as well, so that's rich. And they're meant to spend some time looking and observing, and of course there's often surprising things. Could be a water snake, or it could be a heron, or a frog spawn, or some of the birds, blue tits or whatever, or it could be some of the buds, learning to identify the trees. And then what they do is they come back to the classroom, and usually we'll put on some classical music or something nice, pleasing, a sort of calm environment. They'll get out their watercolour paints, they'll open up their nature notebook, and if it's something easily portable back, like a leaf, they'll bring that, set it down on the desk, and they'll get out their watercolours and spend 20 minutes or so doing a watercolour of that. Label it up. They must know what it is. There are guidebooks in the classrooms. Being able to name things isn't the relationship itself. So we mustn't overemphasize it. You can have a great sense of relationship, connection with these particular flowers and trees and so on, nature. And really appreciate it and see it, but naming helps. So they name it, and that's it. And then the next week they go out, and a fortnight later they do another walk and they find something else. If it's a bird or something, they might use a picture from a guidebook or something to help them as they reproduce that in their nature notebook. But it's like narration in the sense that it's encouraging patient attentiveness to these ordinary natural phenomena, supposedly ordinary, and encouraging appreciation. And I think it's very powerful because it has it's a pre-science. It's encouraging attentiveness, engagement, appreciation. It's also, you might say, it has an environmental or an ecological impact. We won't, and I've heard, people have said, how will we know if something has become extinct if we didn't know it was there in the first place? Because we never bothered to pay attention.
And the naming helps with that as well.
I think so, yes, yeah.
But often we don't value it, might not even see something if we can't name it a little bit. Certainly being able to name helps one to see.
I think so, yeah. And you get this sense, again, it's almost like a relationship. So we know one another's names, but that's the ash tree or the holm oak or whatever it is. And you start to just pay attention to it across the seasons because you've noticed it.
Yeah.
And then it has a sort of pleasure and resonance for you. And that, again, illustrates the science of relations, because as you form that sense of connection with these realities outside of you, it has a way of feeding you.
It helps to engraft on the mind. some of that relational aspect with the natural world.
That's right. And to appreciate, is to admire the beauty of something.
Yes.
Yeah.
Am I right that she was a great fan of the romantic nature poets? As far as I could work out, she, despite her being, I think, a sort of never married and was an invalid for the last part of her life.
Yes.
And yet she seemed to have this very passionate soul in many ways, and to respond a lot to Coleridge, Wordsworth.
That's right, exactly right. Yes, I mean, you're right. So those, the poets pepper her writing quite a lot. And of course she had her teacher training college in Ambleside.
Yes, of course. Yeah.
Which is sort of just a mile from Wordsworth's home. And so one wonders if there was some connections there. But, poetry and these things seem to really capture for her deeper truth. And I think there's a lot to be said for that.
When I've talked about Charlotte Mason with other people and why I think it is such a unique vision, quite a common reaction I get is, well, that all sounds very lovely, but how does it fit children for the modern world?
Yes.
Do you think there's any truth in the charge that the heritage vision is a retreatist one, that you are, yes, providing things which perhaps provide solace and some succour to people, but that there's a danger that the children might come out not necessarily retarded, but at least sort of ill-equipped for the dynamism, the computational and engineering realities of the modern world.
Yes.
How do you respond to that?
Well, I would want to know what equipping are we seeking, and the critics to tell me what qualities do you think they should have, and then I can tell you whether or not our children coming out have those qualities. But I mean, we have emphasized, in emphasizing nice nature study and picture study is another, the study of fine art, composer study and history and so on. It can sound nature. It can sound slightly romantic.
Yes,
kind of
antediluvian or
it's
nostalgic.
Like children skipping through the fields of poppies and having a delightful time every day. But bear in mind, so that isn't true.
Yes,
these are enriching things, which is why we do them. But she was again very clear on the concept of habit and will, and that the strong person is again the person who can choose the direction of their life, and resisting other impulses or distractions, achieve the thing they set their mind upon achieving. So it's the directed life, which is far from weak. And in fact, it takes tremendous strength of character and will to be that kind of engaged, focused, driven in the right way, goal-orientated person. Now, we have science labs upstairs. We do all the experimental science that you would expect in a senior school and so on. We have science right throughout. So the fact that we do nature walks doesn't in any sense mean that we're not passionate about physics and getting at the underlying realities of what's going on in nature. So the children this morning have just been sitting there in a chemistry mock, for example, in year 11. Also, a lot of our young people are, going out and getting good grades. So far, in our qualification comment here, our theory has been that if children are well served as people, they will tend to perform well in exams, in keeping with where they are at that point in their life. And that is certainly true.
Just on that point, Jason, do you feel that you have to compromise your strongly held vision to the extent that, say, from now, we're now in sort of Christmas time, from now until June, they'll just be doing past paper after past paper after past paper, and that all the life of the school is put on hold for 6 months or so?
The exam pressure is real.
Yep.
The children know it, and I obviously said earlier that we try to resist the message, you need to know this for the exam, and we do, but it's coming, they know it's coming, and it's a real pressure because it's a gateway to their future. And so we have to be very straightforward about that. And so hopefully we try to retain a very human culture which encourages by and large, very conscientious pupils to keep it in perspective.
Yeah.
And occasionally some need a bit of leaning, of
Yeah.
course,
Yeah.
to achieve what we think they're capable of. But by the end of the second senior school years, we are having to acknowledge that reality to make sure they're well prepared. And yet we try, as teachers and through assemblies and other whole school culture events, to say that this is about something much bigger than that moment, even though that moment matters.
Yeah.
So our children are coming out, I think, very well prepared to go on to the next stage of life. We've got 2 leavers groups already who've gone out from us. And that first group is now in the process of their UCAS applications and so on, and thinking about university. So that's exciting. It'll be fun to see where they go.
And they're still in touch with the school?
Yes, very much so. Yeah. We had a 10th anniversary celebration 3 weeks ago, and the head boy and head girl from 2 years ago gave some speeches on that occasion, which were outstanding. And one of the things they said is that they both felt that here at Heritage and in this kind of school culture, they developed some critically important qualities as people which have enabled them to go on confidently. Things like an appreciation for learning for its own sake, that they get that idea that knowledge is special regardless of its utility. Or they took risks as people, and they found out a bit about who they were in a smaller culture, a smaller environment where there's very natural relationships between teachers and pupils. So where there isn't an excessive amount of peer pressure, but they're settled in who they are as they've gone off to large sixth form colleges. They are not in any sense overwhelmed by that because they're content in who they are. One of the facets of our culture here is that we have no smartphones, so children are not allowed to bring anything other than a dumb phone, which as it were, but that's for safety purposes and transport arrangements, which they actually hand in at the beginning. They collect it at the end of the day from their registration tutor. So that, I think, is an important emphasis of the school, that we're creating space in which they can relate face to face and with the realities that we're drawing their attention to in the curriculum, and not be distracted, and also somewhat protected in that sense in their relationships with one another against some of the abuses of that sort of social media environment.
The families must appreciate that so much, because even if a family strongly holds that belief, in other schools the peer pressure on that particular child is so strong, whereas to have the environment controlled here to such an extent that it gets sort of maximum buy-in from teachers, pupils and families.
Yes, we do also once a year we do a screen-free week as well, just to try to push the message that that real intellectual growth, not to mention other facets of personal growth, takes effort. And our entertainment culture, our digital culture, is a culture which encourages passivity, not active mental work. And I read something recently, author Andy Crouch wrote a book called The Tech-Wise Family. He talks about technologies as having an inherent bias. They're not neutral. And he says their bias is towards easy everywhere, which is the language he uses. Now what we know is that growth takes proactive engagement and effort. And that actually is quite different to easy everywhere. And I think we need to get this message out, not least if we want to try and encourage our teenagers to continue as readers. Because reading is something that requires a bit of settled mental effort. Obviously it's enriching once you get into the zone, isn't it? But it can feel hard to get into the zone when all these screens hold out for us instant gratification. So we're trying to create a counterculture in these areas here.
A safe space.
And I wouldn't say it's not safe in the sense that we're trying to protect. It's that we're trying to draw them to richer things, holding out what is worthier and better. So it's a positive vision, not a retreat. And let me just say that on the science and technology side, a lot of our those who are our leavers have gone on to do sciences, to do double maths.
Yeah.
You know, we had a boy last year who had 99% in further pure maths in his exam. You know, it's outstanding performance. And a lot of our young people will go on into science and engineering. So the idea that in our relatively low-tech environment that somehow we're anti-technology, anti-science, anti-engineering is absolutely untrue. We're doing a computer science GCSE, by the way. We offer that as an after-school offering, which is open to others in the community as well, incidentally.
Okay,
we're trying to work with some partners to promote the enjoyment of computing, which is a proactive mental thing.
Yeah.
It's not just passive.
Yeah.
So proactive engagement with technology, brilliant. Passive consumption, it goes in a different direction to what education should be doing.
So it's judicious use,
Absolutely.
rather than saying that technology is an inherent good that should be across every classroom and in every lesson that it possibly can be.
Yes, and I think, I mean, this is a school where we won't ever have children with iPads because we want them to learn this habit of attention, and to be able to be people who can ruminate upon a text, and who have therefore a capacity for subtlety of thought, to go against the tide.
You're right about technology always having a bias in one way, but even if you just think of technology as neutral, that's one thing, because a lot of people on the iPad debate just see it as an inherent positive. So to give children iPads, they are doing a job of education in some particular respect.
Yes, but our view on that is that they're ubiquitous.
Yeah.
And also you have armies of engineers, software engineers out there making these devices as user-friendly as they could possibly be.
Yeah.
They're intuitive.
Yeah.
So children our children are very comfortable with all of these devices.
yes.
As anyone would be.
And if an 80 or 90-year-old can pick them up and use them, then so can a 16-year-old.
Well, certainly right, yes. And obviously they're with us for 7 hours a day or so, so there's plenty of other hours in the day, and we encourage parents to be thinking about how to help their children be appropriately engaged with technology. But the truth is the encouragement needs to lean the other direction. How to help them disengage enough to embrace books and to just embrace real life things rather than digital entertainments.
Well, Jason, that seems like a great place to leave it. Thank you so much for your time, and I really appreciate the thoughts that's gone into your answers. Thank you.
Thank you, Will. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Bye.